How does a woman lose a fiancé, a career, and a home in the span of 24 hours? Let me tell you. It all unraveled the night I chose the best table in the room, a corner booth draped in white linen, orchids nodding in a crystal vase, while the rain outside traced frantic paths down the glass. 2 minutes late. 5. 7. And I kept waiting. Daniel arrived at exactly 8 minutes past 7. He looked different, more like he'd finally exhaled after holding his breath for months. He sat down, but not too close. His eyes didn't quite meet mine. "I can't do this," he said. My stomach turned to ice. I remember the way his voice sounded, quiet, precise, like he'd rehearsed every word. I stayed seated anyway, my hands already trembling under the tablecloth. "What do you mean?" I managed, forcing my voice steady. "Is this about the wedding planner?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a small, velvet box, placing it between us. Not to give me anything, but to take it back. "I can't marry you, Natalie," he said. Just like that. 7 words that cut deeper than any cross-examination I'd ever delivered in court. "What?" I whispered. He leaned back in his chair like the truth had finally unburdened him. "It's not you. It's just we're moving in different directions. I've met someone else." Vanessa Hamilton and I connect in ways I never realized before. Vanessa Hamilton, daughter of Douglas Hamilton, the district attorney who practically held half the city in his pocket. My heart started racing. "You're leaving me for her?" I said. "It's not like that," he insisted, though it clearly was. "This is better for both of us. I have to think about my future." He didn't even flinch while I stared at him, stunned and silent, trying to grasp how the man I was supposed to marry in 13 days could erase me like a redacted line in a legal brief. And as if he hadn't torn me up enough already, he added, "Also, the ring. It's a family heirloom. My mother would be devastated if it left the family." My fingers went numb as I slipped it off. My hands were shaking, but I managed it. I placed the ring gently on the table between us and said, "Thank you for your honesty." Then I stood up and walked out, past the marble bar, past the waiters hovering with dessert menus, past the eyes turning to follow me, probably wondering what gossip they'd just witnessed. By the time I left the restaurant, the rain was coming down so hard it blurred the neon signs into bleeding streaks of pink and blue. I barely noticed. My phone kept buzzing, emails, news alerts. Somewhere between 3rd and Lexington, I saw the headline pop up on my lock screen. D.A. Hamilton backs a merger between his office and City Task Force. Vanessa Hamilton engaged to corporate counsel Daniel Hayes. My chest felt like someone had tied steel bands around it and started cranking. By noon the next day, the managing partner called me in. The conversation took 4 minutes. "We're under political pressure, Natalie," he said, smoothing his tie. "Hamilton's office is threatening to scrutinize some of our pending cases." "And that has to do with me how?" I heard myself ask. He didn't answer, just slid a folder across the table. My name on the tab. Termination paperwork, severance, a politely worded letter I could use for references. I sat there, hands in my lap, while my entire career collapsed around me like scaffolding torn from a building. By sunset, my office was empty. The walls looked naked without my degrees and framed trial victories. I'd thought the worst thing that could happen to me was losing Daniel. I was wrong. I carried my box of things, legal texts, my diploma rolled tight like a weapon, down the courthouse steps, and realized I had nowhere to go. My apartment was under Daniel's name. I'd moved in with him 2 years ago. I didn't even have the key to the place anymore. Every dollar I'd saved had gone into deposits for the wedding, the catering, the dress. I had less than $200 in my checking account and 5 days until payday. So I sat there, on the cold granite steps of the courthouse, rain still clinging to my hair. People passed by, umbrellas bumping into each other like tiny collisions in a courtroom hallway. I don't know how long I cried, long enough that the streetlights flickered on. It felt like the world was continuing without me, like I'd been quietly erased from the record. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, a horn blared. I wiped my face with my sleeve, tasting salt and rain, and whispered to no one, "I have nothing left." But the words hung there, hollow and untrue, because if I still had breath in my lungs, I still had the law. And one day I'd make them all remember exactly who Natalie Hart was. One minute I was there, rain soaking through my suit jacket, shivering so hard my teeth knocked together. The next, I was in a cab headed nowhere. I gave the driver an address out of pure reflex. It was the only place that felt safe enough to say out loud, Mrs. Garcia's Bakery. The sign out front still said Sweet Lotus Pastries in faded gold letters. The smell of warm sugar and cardamom hit me before the bell even jingled. Mrs. Garcia was behind the counter, piping frosting onto a cake shaped like a lotus blossom. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, eyes sharp behind her reading glasses. When she looked up and saw me, the piping bag slipped from her hand. "Oh my God!" she exclaimed, rushing around the counter. "Natalie, sweetheart, what's happened to you?" That was all it took. I burst into tears in the middle of the bakery. 10 minutes later, I was curled up on her velvet sofa, clutching a mug of jasmine tea while she fussed over me as she had when I was her lawyer, and, over time, more like a daughter. Mrs. Garcia didn't ask questions. She simply draped a thick cashmere throw over my shoulders and said, "You're staying here, understand? As long as you need. This house has plenty of room, and you don't have to prove a thing to anyone." That night I didn't sleep. I lay there on the guest bed, staring at the ornate ceiling, replaying every second of that conversation with Daniel, the calmness in his voice, the way he'd looked at me like a closing argument he'd already decided to reject. Had he ever loved me? Or was I simply a placeholder until someone with a name like Hamilton came along? By sunrise, the sharp pain in my chest had dulled into something heavier, something close to shame. I'd been days away from stepping into a new life, a new chapter, my own family. Instead, I was back at the beginning. 31 years old, heartbroken, homeless, humiliated. By noon, I showered, dressed, and slipped out of Mrs. Garcia's brownstone as though nothing had happened. The city moved around me as usual. Taxis blared, pedestrians shoved past. A partner from my old firm waved from across the street, shouting something about my wedding plans. I waved back, forced a smile, lied, because telling the truth felt like ripping myself open all over again. Later that night, after Mrs. Garcia insisted on feeding me a mountain of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, she poured us both glasses of warm plum wine. "I know someone," she said suddenly. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You remember Mr. Julian Cross?" I blinked. "Who?" "Julian Cross," she said, like I should recognize the name. "He owns buildings all over the city. Tech companies, shipping, I don't even know all what. But he keeps very quiet, very private." I tilted my head. "Mrs. Garcia, I'm a lawyer, not a real estate agent." She waved a hand. "He's looking for legal counsel, personal, confidential, pays triple the normal rates." Triple. My brain did the math before I could stop it. 3 times my old partner salary. Enough to buy my own apartment, enough to fight back, enough to make Daniel and the entire Hamilton family choke on their own champagne. But something inside me recoiled. "I don't know, Mrs. Garcia," I murmured. "I'm not sure." She gave me a long look over her glasses. "You're a brilliant lawyer," she shot back. "You're more qualified than anyone else he's tried. And trust me, that man scares most people off in under a week. You're stubborn. That might actually work in your favor." I almost laughed. I wasn't even sure what part of me still counted as stubborn. Everything inside me felt shattered, but something in her voice, the word escape. echoed through my chest. "Do you have his contact?" I asked finally. 10 minutes later, she slipped me a crisp white card engraved in expensive silver lettering, Julian Cross, private office, and beneath it, a number. It took me until after midnight to call. I stood outside on Mrs. Garcia's balcony, wrapped in a wool coat, the Manhattan skyline flickering around me, phone trembling in my hand. A woman answered on the second ring. "Mr. Cross's office." "Yes," I said, my voice catching slightly. "This is Natalie Hart. I was told there may be a position for legal counsel." A pause, then cool and precise. "Are you available for an interview tomorrow morning at 9? I blinked. "Yes, I can be there." "Bring your credentials and references. The address will be texted shortly. Do not be late." And the line went dead. 12 hours later, I stood in the marble lobby of the Cross Building, clutching my leather briefcase like a lifeline. The security desk alone looked more high-tech than the entire evidence room at the DA's office. Glass barriers, retina scanners, a silent man in a gray suit who barely blinked as he printed my guest pass. "Top floor," he said, sliding me the badge. "Penthouse." The ride up took forever. The elevator barely hummed as it shot skyward, my reflection multiplying across mirrored walls. My pulse pounded in my ears the entire 60 floors. When the doors opened, it felt like stepping into another dimension. Polished black stone floors, sculptures of twisted metal reaching for a ceiling 20 feet high, walls of glass revealing a jagged skyline, clouds drifting below us like slow ships. The air smelled faintly of leather and expensive cologne. I followed a silent housekeeper down a hallway, my heels echoing like a judge's gavel. I stepped into a cavernous living room drenched in silver light and saw him, Julian Cross. He was waiting by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to us. He sat in a sleek motorized wheelchair, one hand resting on the controls, the other gripping the armrest as though to keep himself tethered. "Mr. Cross," the butler said crisply, "this is Natalie Hart, the attorney I told you about." He didn't turn at first, just sat there silent, as the city sprawled beneath him. Then slowly, he pivoted, and I forgot how to breathe. I didn't know what I'd expected, maybe an older man, gray and fragile. But Julian Cross was in his mid-30s, lean and tall, even seated, with dark hair cut close to his scalp, and eyes like polished steel, watching, measuring, as if deciding exactly how little I was worth. My pulse flickered. Finally, he said, "You're younger than I expected." I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off. "How long do you think you'll last? A week? 10 days? What's the bet this time?" Silence spread out between us, thick as velvet. "I'm not here to place bets," I said finally. "I'm here to do my job." One dark brow lifted the tiniest fraction. "Sit." I crossed the room, perched on the edge of a leather chair. The silence between us stretched like a high wire. "I've read your record," Julian said. "Wexler and Rowe. High conviction reversals. Not afraid of the press. Or powerful enemies." "I suppose that's true," I said carefully. He shifted slightly in his chair, a movement so subtle I almost missed the wince of pain that crossed his face. "They tell me you lost your position this week," he continued, "because you were inconvenient." My jaw tightened. That's one way to put it. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, not quite hope, but curiosity. He studied me like he was searching for cracks in my facade, then finally said, "I'll make this simple. I need someone who doesn't scare easy, someone who understands the law. The retainer is $30,000, paid up front. After that, you work only for me. No sharing, no leaking." He rolled closer. The hum of the motor was the only sound in the vast glass room. "You answer to me and me alone." My breath caught. 30,000? That was more than I'd ever held in my bank account at once. I thought of Daniel. Of Vanessa's perfect smile splashed across the news, of sitting on the courthouse steps, rain dripping off my hair, believing I had nothing left. "I want one thing clear," I said. "I won't lie for you, not in court, not to the feds, not to anyone." Julian's mouth twitched as if he was about to smile but changed his mind. "Understood," he said. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Hart." And just like that, my entire life tilted on its axis again. By my third day in Julian Cross's world, I was drowning in paper. Financial statements, corporate minutes, legal memos stacked like towers on my temporary desk in the penthouse library. I was cross-referencing an acquisition file when a low voice floated in from down the hall. Smooth, confident, male. Not Julian, not anyone from the household staff. Curiosity prickled up my spine. I slipped off my heels, the marble floors cool under my feet, and crept toward the glass corridor. The voice grew clearer, talking, laughing, punctuated by the clink of ice against crystal. There, sprawled across a white leather sofa, was a man in his early 40s, a platinum watch glinting in the morning sun as he nursed a tumbler of something that definitely wasn't juice. "Julian, you look like hell," he said with a dry laugh. Julian, seated across from him in his sleek power wheelchair, managed a tight smile. "Good to see you too, Leonard." That was my introduction to Leonard Stokes, Julian's longtime CFO, the man who, according to Mrs. Garcia, had stepped in to run Cross and Carter Holdings after Julian's accident. Something about him instantly made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing at Julian, like he was still measuring his value in dollars and cents. Or maybe it was the way his eyes lingered on me when I entered, slow and assessing, as if he were appraising a piece of property. "This, the new legal prodigy?" he asked. "Natalie Hart?" I kept my voice cool. "Good morning, Mr. Stokes." I set a leather folder on the side table. "Any better than the last three?" Leonard quipped, taking a long sip of his drink. "She's not here to entertain you," Julian snapped. "She's my attorney." The conversation pivoted swiftly to business, overseas subsidiaries, tax shelters, regulatory headaches. I tried to blend into the modern furniture, invisible, until a single name dropped into the air like a grenade. Hamilton. Leonard leaned forward, voice dropping. "Hamilton's ready to push through the acquisition. All we need is the asset transfer agreement to the holding entity. The board will rubber stamp it once they see the numbers. After that, Cross and Carter practically runs itself, and Hamilton Capital absorbs it." Julian didn't respond. He stared out at the skyline, jaw locked so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "I've already prepped the docs," Leonard continued. "We just need your signature, boss. Preferably today." "I'll look them over," Julian said flatly. "You've been saying that for weeks. If we wait much longer, the window closes." Julian stayed silent. My pulse pounded like a war drum. I slipped away from the room before either of them realized I was still standing there. Hamilton, Douglas Hamilton. That name still made my insides twist, and then it all snapped into place. Hamilton Capital, Douglas, Leonard pushing for Julian's signature, the company. They were trying to steal it, strip Julian of control while he was still recovering. And if Douglas Hamilton was involved, Vanessa Hamilton couldn't be far behind. My chest squeezed as I shut the study door behind me. Was this somehow connected to what happened to me? That night, I found Julian in the study in the East Wing, staring out at the skyline as rain lashed the glass. "Julian," I said, dropping the folder on his desk, "we've got a problem." He didn't turn. "I pay you to solve problems, not bring me new ones." I snapped the folder open, pages fanning out like a deck of cards. "Your CFO is selling your company out from under you. These signatures aren't yours. And this Nevada shell company?" I traced it. It connects back to Hamilton Holdings. I even mentioned Vanessa Hamilton. At that, he finally looked at me. His eyes were sharper than broken glass. "You know her?" My ex-fiancé left me for her, I said. Julian blinked slowly. Daniel Hayes. My breath caught. You know him? Number, but the Hamilton's name comes up too often in Leonard's circles. He wheeled back from the table, his eyes searching mine. Are you suggesting that my CFO and your ex's new family are running a play together? He rolled closer in his chair, muscles flexing as if he might launch himself out of it. Get out! The words hit me like a slap. Julian! I said, get out! His voice cracked like a whip, rawer than I'd ever heard it. But I didn't move. Listen to me, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I know what it's like to have people you trust turn on you. You're angry. Good. Be angry. But don't be stupid. He stared at me, breathing hard, knuckles white on the wheels of his chair. You think you're the only one who's ever been blindsided? I demanded. They're counting on you freezing. They're counting on you not wanting to look weak. Well, guess what? You can't afford to do that. He blinked as if surprised I was still standing there. I pushed the folder closer to him. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you we're fighting back. For a long time, he said nothing, just sat there, chest rising and falling. Then, finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, What do you propose? So I told him. A shareholders' meeting was already scheduled in 2 weeks. Leonard would be there, so would the board, and, if I was right, so would a quiet representative from Hamilton Holdings, waiting for the final signatures to slide across the table. We catch him in the act, I said. On record. In front of witnesses. Julian's jaw clenched. He'll deny it. Say you forged the documents yourself. Not if we catch him transferring ownership live, I said. Wire transfer logs, authentication tokens, one slip, and we bury him. Julian let out a bitter laugh. You're a shark, he said, underneath the nice suits and polite smiles. Thanks. Coming from you, that's almost a compliment. He rolled back, staring out at the city lights. Why are you doing this, Natalie? You barely know me. I swallowed. Because Hamilton took everything from me, and I'm not letting him take you too. He was silent so long I thought I'd lost him. Then he reached for the folder and flipped it open. His hands shook slightly. Fine, he said. We'll give them the show they're expecting, and then we'll burn the whole stage down. The plan took days to shape. Every night, long after the penthouse had gone quiet and the city lights faded into midnight haze, Julian and I sat across from each other at the glass conference table, dissecting documents, emails, bank statements. His hands sometimes shook with fatigue, but his voice never wavered. He was building a war room one piece at a time, and I was his only ally inside those walls. He'd already brought in his private forensic accountants. They were tracing the paper trail, gathering every signature, every secret clause. Julian held nothing back from me, not even his fears. I trusted Leonard more than anyone, he said one night, his eyes shadowed under the chandelier glow. He was there when I pitched my first startup. He spoke for me when I couldn't stand in front of a room. All this time, I whispered, you were right to trust your gut. I was too late, he said quietly, but I won't be late again. And for the first time since I met him, Julian Cross smiled. By 12:30 a.m., the penthouse had gone quiet, the city outside glittering like spilled diamonds. I rose from my desk, stretching my stiff shoulders, and caught a glow leaking under the door to the private fitness room. At first I told myself it was nothing, that Julian had probably fallen asleep watching the financial news. But something nagged at me. I slipped on my blazer, padded barefoot down the hush of the marble corridor, and pushed the door open just enough to peer through. What I saw knocked the breath out of my lungs. Julian Cross was standing, not fully, not unsupported. He gripped a pair of parallel bars, set up over a sleek black rubber mat, his arms trembling under the strain. Sweat glistened on his temples. His legs quivered with every attempt to shift his weight forward, each movement deliberate and excruciating. But he was doing it. Slow, determined. Inch by inch, he forced one foot in front of the other as though he could will his body back into obedience. My heart thudded so loudly I was sure he'd hear it. He didn't notice me at first, too focused on the bars. But the whisper of the door hinge betrayed me. He turned, his face morphing from sheer effort to fury in an instant. "What the hell are you doing here?" he snapped. "Get out!" His voice cracked raw and terrified like I'd caught him naked. He tried to release the bars to drop back into his chair, but his left knee buckled. I lunged forward just in time, wrapping my arm around his waist before he hit the ground. For a second, we just stood there. His weight heavy against me, his breath hot on my shoulder. "Why?" I asked softly. "Why are you keeping this a secret?" His hands clenched tighter around the bars until his knuckles turned white. "Because the second people see progress, they start expecting miracles. And that's not how recovery works." He swallowed hard, eyes glinting. "I have to stand at that meeting, Natalie. They have to see me on my feet." "Why?" I asked gently. "You have nothing to prove." "Yes, I do," he shot back. "They think I'm weak, that I'm finished. That's how people like Hamilton win. They count on you disappearing. Well, I'm not disappearing." My throat tightened. "Then let me help you," I said. "We'll practice every day, until you can stand as long as you need to." He hesitated. His hands were still clutching the bars. Finally, he nodded. "Just once." So I stayed. Counting out reps, whispering encouragement, catching him when his legs faltered, and somewhere between one step and the next, I realized I was no longer just fighting for his company. I was fighting for him. The morning of the shareholders' meeting dawned cold and sharp, sunlight bouncing off glass towers like blades. We arrived at Cross Corporation headquarters 30 minutes early. The lobby was a forest of marble columns and echoing heels. News crews milled outside, cameras poised. Inside, the buzz was electric. Everyone expected Julian Cross to roll in quietly, sign a few papers, and vanish. Instead, he pushed open the heavy boardroom doors and walked in, on his own feet. For a second, it felt like the entire room had been sucked empty of air. Leonard Stokes, the CFO, was mid-sentence, talking revenue forecasts. His jaw dropped so fast I thought it might hit the table. A hush fell over the mahogany table. Chairs creaked. Papers rustled. Across from him, in a pale slate suit, sat Douglas Hamilton himself, Vanessa's father, his eyes cold and sharp as a scalpel. Beside him, Vanessa perched like an ice sculpture, legs crossed, her lipstick a shade too red as if it were war paint. And next to her, Daniel. He looked smaller than I remembered, still handsome, still polished, but somehow diminished, like a borrowed suit that no longer fit quite right. "Good morning," Julian said evenly, voice carrying to every corner of the room. Leonard blinked, collecting himself. "Julian, perhaps you should sit down." "I'll stand," Julian interrupted. He gripped the edge of the table, steadying himself. Sweat beaded at his temple, but his voice never wavered. "This meeting," Julian said quietly, "is now under my authority, and we're going to start with this." He dropped a thick folder onto the glass tabletop. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I stood behind him, my breath caught halfway in my chest, watching as he flipped open page after page. Each sheet held proof. Shell companies, forged signatures, hidden transactions funneled through Hamilton-connected funds. Every lie Leonard had built to steal the company while Julian was still learning how to breathe again. Douglas Hamilton's face barely moved, but Vanessa shifted, jaw tight. Daniel stared down at his hands as though wishing the floor would swallow him whole. Leonard's face drained of color. "This is insane. Save it," Julian cut in coldly. "Your personal emails, Leonard. They're in here too, including your little meeting at the Fairmont Hotel last month, discussing final payout terms with Hamilton's legal team." Leonard lunged for the binder, but Julian slammed his cane down with a crack. "Touch it," Julian hissed, "and I swear I'll break your fingers." The board erupted in a storm of whispers and shifting chairs. The general counsel stood. "Mr. Cross, do you wish to request a vote of no confidence?" "I do," Julian said. "Effective immediately." The vote was unanimous. Leonard was removed. The acquisition deals nullified. Ownership reverted to Julian Cross. Douglas Hamilton pushed back from the table, his voice a razor's edge. "You have no idea who you're fighting, Julian." "Oh, I do," Julian said softly. "A man who hides behind his daughter's connections, and another who tried to steal what didn't belong to him." Vanessa scoffed. "And what about her?" She jerked her chin at me. "Your new lawyer. What is she? Your partner now?" Julian turned and met my eyes. His voice was calm, unwavering. "She's the reason I'm standing here at all." Daniel swallowed hard, eyes flicking to me but said nothing. When 4 people were taken out of the office by security, Julian's eyes met mine. "Next order of business, disposition of any external actors connected to the conspiracy." I drew a slow breath. "I recommend the board authorize immediate legal action against Hamilton Holdings," I said, "including subpoenas, asset tracing, and injunctions." Vanessa Hamilton's father was directly linked to the shell companies used to attempt the hostile takeover. A ripple of shock went through the room. One director, a pale man in a gray suit, stammered, "But that's the district attorney." I looked him dead in the eye. "I'm aware." Julian's voice sliced in like a knife. "Hamilton abused his office to sabotage me and seize private assets. I won't let that stand. Prepare the filings." Some board members exchanged worried looks, but no one objected. Julian reached into the inside pocket of his suit and pulled out a folded letter. "I also tender a formal request for a criminal investigation," he said. "There's enough evidence here to warrant federal review." The lawyer took the letter from his hand with careful fingers, as if it might explode. One by one, the directors nodded grimly. "Consider it done, Mr. Cross," the chairwoman said. Julian exhaled, and the entire room seemed to breathe out with him. When the room finally emptied, Julian and I stayed behind. He finally sagged against the table. But his eyes found mine, fierce and blazing. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, "for believing in me when I couldn't." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "let's rebuild your empire." He managed a laugh, low and shaky. "Together," he said. Then, for the first time since I'd met him, he smiled wide and genuine, and I realized something I hadn't let myself believe until that moment. He wasn't the only one who'd learned how to stand again. Weeks passed. The penthouse no longer felt like a fortress. Windows stood open more often, letting in warm breezes instead of echoing silence. Even Julian's private terrace, once barren, began to bloom again, with bright potted trees and flickering lanterns. Julian still had hard days. His gait remained cautious, each step deliberate, pain sometimes etched across his face, but the bitterness that used to shadow every movement had begun to fade. So had mine. The wedding I never had. I stopped mourning it. The name I almost took, I let it go. Slowly, I started seeing myself as more than just the woman someone left behind. I found my rhythm again. Reading legal briefs for pleasure, running laps in Central Park, laughing. Julian made it a point to cook one night a week, even though he burned garlic and cursed at the stove like it had personally betrayed him. I let him. I'd sit on the marble island, legs tucked beneath me, grinning at his frustration. It became our ritual. Small, silly, perfect. One night, he set a plate in front of me and said, "If this kills you, I want it on record that I tried." I snorted. "I'll make sure your shares go to charity." He paused. "Actually, no." I looked up, startled. "I transferred part of the company to a trust," he said, voice soft but certain. "One that includes you." I blinked. "What?" "I'm not handing you the company," he said gently, "but I built something better with you than I ever did alone. And I want you to be part of what comes next." I stared at him, words stuck in my throat. "Julian." He slipped a hand into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Before you say anything," he rushed on, "you don't have to answer today, or this year. I know I'm still learning how to be this person again, and I know you didn't sign up for all of this." He opened the box. Inside was a simple band of platinum inlaid with one tiny sapphire. "But I'd like to ask anyway," he said quietly. "Will you consider walking this road with me? Not because I need saving, but because with you I remember who I am." I stared at him, stunned. Part of me wanted to bolt for the door. Part of me wanted to laugh. But mostly I just felt calm, like I'd stepped out of the darkest part of the forest and found not a castle, but a clearing, a place to breathe again. I stepped closer. "I'm not promising anything," I said softly. "I've had enough heartbreak for one lifetime." He gave a tight nod, trying to hide the flicker of hurt in his eyes. "But," I added, letting a small smile curve my lips, "I'm also not saying no." Julian blinked. Then, slowly, a smile broke across his face. Shy, bright, and so achingly real it made my chest tighten, and for the first time in months, I let myself hope. We didn't rush. There were no headlines, no glossy magazine covers, just more mornings, more progress. Julian was soon walking half a mile unassisted. The following month, I finalized the paperwork to open my own legal consultancy. We hired staff. I stayed in the penthouse, but it no longer felt like his. It felt like ours. In quiet moments, like late at night when the city glowed silver outside our office windows, I'd catch Julian watching me with this look, equal parts gratitude and curiosity, as if he still couldn't believe I existed. And I realized I'd been looking at him the same way. As for Daniel, he texted once, 2 lines asking if I was okay. I never replied. I didn't need to, because the truth was, I'd already gotten everything I was meant to take from that heartbreak. I thought of Daniel sometimes, of that perfect restaurant, the soft jazz, the scent of espresso, and betrayal. But when I thought of him now, I didn't feel rage or sorrow. I felt free. Because losing Daniel wasn't the end of my story. It was my beginning. The day he walked out, he handed me my freedom, wrapped in heartbreak. He forced me to remember who I was when no one else was looking, and to find the courage to fight for myself. On Julian's birthday, we took a train north up the Hudson, just the 2 of us. We walked along the river at sunset, wind cool enough to sting, the sky painted in streaks of pink and silver. At one point, he stared out across the water and said, "Do you ever wish we could go back to who we were before all of this?" I shook my head. "I hope not." He turned to look at me, curious. "Because who we became," I said softly, "is better." He didn't answer. He just reached for my hand and didn't let go. And as the city lights shimmered like stars outside our windows, I realized that sometimes the best victories weren't the ones you planned. They were the ones you found in the wreckage, when you stood back up and kept going, together.